Okay, good morning. Today's daf is Gittin daf mem hey. We are at the two dots, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up on mem dalid amabet. Let me share my screen and we can really get started. We'll see. I don't think so, but here we. Oh, okay. All right, but here we go. So in our Mishnah that we learned 2 days ago on mem gimel amabet, we saw that if a master sells a slave who's in Israel to someone who lives outside of Israel, the slave goes free. This was a rabbinic penalty on the master for taking an action that reduces the slave's ability to perform mitzvot. And as we pick up on the two dots on the fourth to last narrow line of the Gemara, we're going to address variations on this theme. And finally, we'll conclude with the fact that the odd thing is that if we're talking about a Jew who bought this slave from Eretz Yisrael to outside of Eretz Yisrael, he is going to have to lose his money and free the slave. And so the question is, what is going on? Why are we penalizing the buyer? Maybe we should be penalizing the seller. So we'll be discussing that as well. But
they owe the buyer.
Well, it depends if it's a good slave or a bad slave. So if a better slave, it's going to cost more. And he'll lose that money. So, all right, let's take a look and let's see. So Amar Rebbe Abahu. So again, 2 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up in the narrow lines of the Gemara. Last word on the line. Amar Rebbe Abahu Shana Li Rebbe Yochanan. Rebbe Yochanan would teach me Eved Sheyatza Achar Rabba L'Surya. Now, Surya, so a slave who goes after his own master to Surya. Surya, we saw roughly. Let's see. This is Daf Mem Dalid. And that was Daf Chet. So we saw this almost about 5 weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago. We saw that, in fact, if maybe 6 weeks ago almost, we saw that if, in fact, you were to sell, that Surya is considered like outside of Israel for some things and like inside Israel for other things. And one of the things that it was considered like outside Israel for is that if you sell a slave there or bring a slave there, it is considered like you brought the slave outside of Israel. And so Rashi tells us here, L'Surya, top line of Rashi in the widest of the lines, Aram Sova. It's a place called, in Aram, it's a place called Sova within Aram, the Kechutzla Aretzi, and it is considered like outside of the land of Israel, L'Mechiras Avadim, for the purposes of the sale of slaves. Kedetanya B'Parakama, as we learned in the first chapter of this Masechet, Daf Chet Amud Aleph, Hamocher Abdul Surya, Kamocher L'Chutzla Aretz, that if you sell your slave from the land of Israel to Surya, it's like you're selling him to outside of Israel. And what happened? And now you brought him to Surya, Umcharo Sham Rabo, and there the master now sells his slave to somebody else. Yatzalacheris, he goes out free. Now, what the question is here, V'hatani Rabbi Chia ibid es zechuso, but Rabbi Chia taught in a brisa that the slave loses his right to go free. So what's the story? And now why would he lose his right to go free? Well, he'd lose his right to go free because he voluntarily chose to go to Surya. And since he voluntarily chose to go with his master to Surya, and he had the ability to prevent it, so as a result, that shows a willingness to observe less mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz, and so as a result, he said, so maybe he would lose his right to freedom. So lo kasha, it's not difficult because we can distinguish between situations where the slave gets to keep his right to go free and the situations where the slave loses his right to go free. Kan shadas rabo lachs, or where the slave's master plans to go back to Eretz Yisrael, so then he will go free, because if he's sold, because he went to Syria thinking that he was going to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And Kansha Ein Das Rabbalachzer, but if the master is intending to leave Eretz Yisrael permanently and go to Syria permanently, then if the slave decides to go with the master to Syria, he will go free. Okay, so Vahatanya. So now 1 second, and we have a brisa that shows that this is the case. So it's a little bit odd wording because usually Vahatanya is the posing of a question, but here we have the same situation that we have. We have something that's supportive. Yotzei ha'eved acharabo l'Surya, right? So then so now the Gemara is going to finish the brisa in a moment, but now it poses a question. The question first says, is Yotzei ha'eved acharabo l'Surya? So a slave is required to leave his master, follow his master to Syria. Yotzei. 1 second. That implies that he has to. Lo sagi de lo nafik. He has no other alternative. V'hatanan ve'ena kol motziin. 1 second. You can't tell me that he's forced to, because we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we saw at the end of Ketubot, where it says that although you can force your family to move to Eretz Yisrael, you're not able to force your family or your slave to move out of Eretz Yisrael. So a slave who is being brought outside of Eretz Yisrael has the ability to tell his owner, stop, I don't want to go. And so as a result, if the slave owner goes, then the slave owner has to free his slave if he doesn't want to go with him. So Ella Yatza ha'eved acharabo l'Surya. So let's reread the brisa, and it should be that the slave chose to leave. He left Eretz Yisrael to follow his master to Syria. Umacharo Rabo Sham, and now the continuation of the brisa, and his master sells him there. Imdas Rab Lachzor, if the master plans to go back to Eretz Yisrael, Kofanoto, then we're going to force him to free the slave. Ein das Rabo Lachzor, ein Kofanoto. And if the master does not plan to go back to Eretz Yisrael, well, then we will not force him to sell the slave. Amar of Anan Shemeit Minei Demar Shmuel Tarti. So along these lines, Rav Anan testifies that he heard 2 different rulings from Shmuel. And one of the rulings, was this ruling that if you go to Syria, then depending on whether you intend to come back, you'll free the slave. V'idach de itma'ar, or the ruling more generally that when you sell a slave to a foreign land, he must go free. So v'idach de idmar, and the other one was the following: hamocher sadeo b'shnas hayovel atzma. Okay, so let's just back up and remind ourselves of what Yovel is. Yovel is the 50th year. We don't commemorate it any longer, but we have the idea that Yovel was the Jubilee year, and everybody would go back to their original land, and all Jewish slaves, even if the Jewish slave had committed to stay on with his master for a longer period of time, even that Jewish slave would go free. So again, what happens if you sell your field during Yovel? Is there some special rule? So there's a special rule. Rav Amar Mechura V'Yatza. It is considered sold, but then it immediately goes back to the owner, because again, the Yovel year triggers a return of all land to its original owner. It's a Jewish method of sort of equalization of wealth and the like, to ensure that nobody becomes too poor. Although often we think of Judaism as a capitalistic religion, there are elements of social justice and the like that ensures that there's protection for those who are weak and might otherwise be taken advantage. So Rav says that the sale is a valid sale, but it goes immediately back to the owner. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, no, it's not a sale at all. There's a void transaction. So now Rav Anan has told us the 2 rules that he heard, but he hasn't said the key element of what he wanted to share. Bechada hadres vine. Rav Anan says that in one case, we were told that Shmuel said that the money goes back to the purchaser. And in another case, the money doesn't go back to the purchaser. So below Yadana Heminahu, but I don't know which one of the cases he told me. He told me that in one case they go back, but I forgot, but either I forgot or he wasn't clear, etc. Which one is the one where the money gets returned, and which one is the money where the money gets kept? So Amar Rav Yosef, Nechzei Anan, Rav Yosef tries to explain for Rav Anan to how we can explain this situation, and he says, let's see. Miditani B'Braisa, we have a brisa that says the following: Hamocher Abdul Chutzlaris, if you sell a slave outside of the land of Israel, Yatzal Lecheres, he goes free, B'Tzarach Get Shechror Mirabo Sheni, and he requires a freedom document. Who from? The second master, not from the first master. So Shma Mina Kanye Rabo Sheni, the second master is the one who buys him. So he actually made the acquisition below Hadres Vine, and the purchase price is not returned because it's a valid sale. Now, when it comes to the other case, in the field case, Shmuel says that it's not a sale at all. So as a result, it must be there, Umos Chosrin. That's where the money gets returned. Okay. So Rav Anan, why didn't, as we turn to Memheyam and Aleph, Rav Anan, why didn't Rav Anan know this? Because Brisa Lo Shmiele, he was not aware of this Brisa that Yosef quoted. The Imid Shmuel. Now, 1 second, why couldn't he have figured this out just from Shmuel's statement? Because maybe the fact that Shmuel said that when the field is not sold, he meant the field is not sold and the money goes back. Well, that doesn't always happen, meaning sometimes you can think that you gave somebody money to buy something or to do something, and even though it doesn't happen, the person gets to keep the money. And what's the story in that situation? Why? How do I know that that's the case? Because Dilma Eina Mechura Umos Matananinu. Because maybe it's not a valid sale, but we treat the money as if it were a gift. Because we have a rule in Judaism: you cannot marry your sister. Not only can't you marry your sister, but even if you were to try to marry your sister, it would not work. It's not a valid transaction. Now, what happens if you do try to marry your sister and you say, here, my sister, I'm going to give you $1,000 in order for you to be married to me. So if one tries to marry his sister, Rav Amar Mos Chosrin. Rav says that the sister has to return the money. But what does Shmuel say? Shmuel says, Shmuel Amar Ma'os Matana. Everybody agrees they're not married. But Shmuel says that the money, because everybody knows that they're not allowed to marry their sister, Shmuel says that the intention must be that the man is trying to give his sister a gift. And that's how he's trying to do it. Okay, so that is situation number one. So in that situation, the couple is not married, and the wife gets to, according to Shmuel, gets to keep the money. And Rav says, no, the money has to get returned.
She has to go look for another man.
And she's definitely going to have to look for another man. Yes. But we actually seem to paskin that the money is a gift that we hold like Shmuel, based on where the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah puts his olive. Okay. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Abaye asks Rav Yosef, because what did we just say? Who is the one who loses, right? I take my slave who is in Israel, and I say to you, Mark, I want to sell you my slave. And you say, sure, I'm going to buy your slave. And you buy my slave. And now the rabbis come and tell you, well, Mark, you live outside of Israel. You have to free your slave, and you don't get your money back. Well, that doesn't sound very fair, right? That doesn't sound good at all. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef, my cause is to kansinan l'lokeach. Why are we punishing the buyer? Nichnasei l'mocher. We should penalize the seller. Well, an important concept. There are two sides to every transaction, and when a transaction violates the Torah, we can blame either of them. Well, Amar le Rav Yosef explained, Lav achbra ganav. The mouse isn't the thief. Who's the thief? Elachora ganav. The hole is the thief. Meaning, if there wasn't a hole in the wall where the mouse could come through and steal the cheese and then get back through the hole, we would not have, the cheese would not have been stolen. So it's not just the mouse's fault, it's really the hole's fault. So, but Abaye says back, Amarle, Ilab Achbaracho Ramanale. Well, in second, if there wasn't a mouse, even if there was a hole, if there wasn't a mouse, the hole wouldn't have stolen anything. So, Mistabra. So as a result, the Gemara explains, well, it makes sense because Heicha Deika Isura Hasam Kansinan. Who's holding the problematic item? Who's holding the slave that should not be outside of the land of Israel? In this example, that me selling the slave to Mark, it's Mark. And so as a result, Mark is the one who's going to get penalized. Okay, similar story. There was a slave who ran away from outside of the land of Israel to the land of Israel. Azal Mare Abasre. The master chased after him. Asal Kamed Rabbi Ami. And he came in front of Rabbi Ami. Amar Le, Rabbi Ami said to him, Nichtov lach shtara adme. You write a contract for the value of the slave. Uchsov le gita de cherusa. Will write a contract that shows that the slave owes you his value, and you write him a document that frees him. The elo. And if you don't do this, we're going to take him away from you. Rabbi Achi barabi Yoshia, based on the teaching of Rabbi Achi of the son of Rabbi Yoshia. All right, so now we're going to learn that teaching, but it'll take a little while for us to get there, so you please be patient. Tanya, we have a brisa. The brisa is going to teach something from a pasuk, and then we're going to have Rabbi Yoshia teach something, and then finally Rabbi Achi is going to teach his lesson of the fact that if a slave runs away from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel, we should free him. Tanya, lo yashvu ba'artzecha pen yachtiu osecha li. There's a verse that says, this is a verse in Shmot Perakav Gimel Pasuk Lamed Gimel that says they shall not dwell in your land, and it refers to the 7 nations of Canaan, that you should not let them dwell in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. Meaning, we don't want them to become problematic. So make sure to get rid of all of the 7 nations. So now I might have thought that this pasuk tells us that all non-Jews should be thrown out of the land of Israel. So Talmud Lomar, lo saskir eved el adonav asher yinatzel elecha me'im adonav. But we have a pasuk in Dvarim that says, don't deliver to a master a slave who escapes to you from his master. So my takanto, what is supposed to happen with this slave who ran away? What's supposed to happen to the slave who ran away? So must be, the next pasuk tells us, imucha yeshev b'kirbucha. He should live with you. So clearly, from the verse itself, we see that a non-Jew can live in the land of Israel. And so, but now the Baraisa is going to understand this metaphorically. Meaning, what does it mean when it says, lo saskir evet es adonav? Don't think that adonav, which means his master, refers to just his physical master with him as a slave, but think of it metaphorically as his God, that this is somebody who has left his God, meaning he wants to go away from his God and worship our God, the Jewish God. So as a result, he's allowed to live with you. That is how the Midrash understands it. Because Rabbi Yoshia, but Rabbi Yoshia says this is problematic because Haimeim Adonav, the fact that it says that he is going away from his master, he escapes to you from his master. According to this interpretation, it shouldn't be from his master, rather Me'im Elohav Mibaile. It should be from his God. So as a result, and this is, although the text says Aviv, the Mesoras Hashas changes it to Elohav. And here we can use the hey, don't have to say Elokav. Elokav is when we refer to our God, but now we're talking about a non-Jewish God. So it's Elohab, his God, with a lowercase g. Ella Amar Rebbe Yoshia. So Rebbe Yoshia rejects the Bryce's explanation and he offers his own. And he says, B'mocher Abdul Chutzla Aretz HaKasum Medaber. This pasuk is telling us about somebody who sells his slave outside the land of Israel, from Israel, and then to outside the land of Israel. And so as a result, he needs to be watched and he needs to not get sent to his new master. But Vikasha Leila Rabbi Achi Rabbi Yoshia. But Rabbi Achi, Rabbi Yoshia's son, says, no, even that doesn't make sense. Hi Asher Yinatzel Elecha. What does it mean that he escapes to you? Asher Yinatzel Me'imach Mi Baile. It should have said that his slave who is separated from you, meaning that he's intending to go outside the land of Israel. That's who is going to be saved. Ella Amar Rabbi Yachi Rabbi Yoshia Be'evid Shabarach Mechutz La'aretz La'aretz HaKasum Medaber. So we finally got to what Rabbi Achi said. Rabbi Achi says that Rabbi Achi, the son of Rabbi Yoshia, says that what we're talking about here in these verses is a slave who ran from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel, and that was the basis. That was the basis that Rabbi Ami ruled that that this person needs to free the slave. But this is not the only opinion about this verse. We now have actually two other opinions about this verse. But Tanya Idach, we have another brisa that says the following: Lo saskir eved el adonav, don't return a slave to his master. Rebbe Omer bilokech eved al manas l'shachraro hakasum medaber. That Rabbi says that this pasuk is telling us that if you buy a slave on the condition of releasing him and letting him go free, and then that slave runs away, you should not return that slave to his master, because the master had promised to free him, and he didn't. And so as a result, that's why we're going to deal with that. So Hekidami, what's the story? Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Dekasav Hachi. We're talking about a situation where the buyer of that slave wrote to his slave the following: when I buy you, you should be treated as if you acquired yourself from now. So as a result, this slave should be really free, but now he's being treated as a slave. And so as a result, that's the situation that the Torah is talking about. Okay, so now we have a story. Rav Chisda So Rav Chisda had a slave who ran to Bei Kutai. Now, Bei Kutai is a place where Kutim lived, so they're going to understand the Torah very literally. Shalach lahu hadrua nihali, and he sent the people in Bei Kutai a note, and he said, "Please, could you return me my slave?" Shalchule lo saskir eved el adonav. 1 second. The Torah explicitly says you can't return a slave to his master. So we'll skip the parentheses. So shalach lahu. So Rav Chisda sent back and said, "Hahu be'evid shebarach mechutz la'aretz la'aretz." Look at the Rabbi Achi b'Rabbi Yoshia. That pasuk is not talking about all slaves in all situations. It's specifically talking about a slave who ran away from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel. As we learned, Rabbi Achi says that slave doesn't get returned. So Umayshna deshalach lahu to the Rabbi Achi b'Rabbi Yoshia. Why did Rav Chisda specifically send them a note about Rav Achi's statement and not Rebbe's statement? Mishum demashma lahu krai, because the implication of the verse is closer to Rabbi Achi. So all right, so that is the end of our story, and we have now another story involving Bei Kutai. So Abaye irkasle chamra Bei Kutai. Abaye lost his donkey in Bei Kutai, and so he sent them a message. Shalach lahu shadru alehi. So go send. Yeah, they found the donkey, and now he says, "Send it back to me." And they say, "Shalchulei shlach simana." They sent back to him a note and said, "Listen, tell us a sign about your donkey. Tell us what's special about your donkey, and then we'll return it to you." So he said, "Shalach lahu dechivra kreise." Well, he's got a white belly. Okay, so shalchulei ilav de nachmani at. If you weren't nachmani, lo hava mishadrarna le nahala. That's not a very good sign, because what color is the stomach of most donkeys? So the point is almost all donkeys have white bellies. So as a result, that's not a real sign. But nonetheless, because they had respect for Rabbaye, they sent him back his donkey. Okay, that finishes our discussion of slaves for the moment. And now we turn to other situations. We are in the middle of how did we get on this in the first place? Is we have been discussing in the various Mishnayos rules that have been established for the benefit of society. And now we have two more. Ein poden es hashvuyin yeser al kedei demehen. You are not allowed to redeem a captive for more than that captive is worth. Mipnei tikun ha'olam, because that is the just, for the benefit of society. Because if you do, well, there could be two problems with it. What do you think the two problems could be?
One, it raises the potential for extortion every
Correct.
time.
It's a future extortion. It makes it a greater incentive for further losses. And the second is that it wastes away the resources of the community. So those are the two explanations. Yeah, it's bad news. So we're going to see which of those explanations we follow. But before we do that, let's take a look at another situation. Ve'ein mevarichin es hashvuyin. You cannot help captives escape, and we will see why in the Gemara. Mipnei tikun ha'olam, because of the benefit of the society. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, no, mipnei takanas hashvuyin. No, it's not that we're worried about society in general. We're worried about the captives that are left. And so that's the situation. So let's take a look and we'll see what this, the Gemara, Rashi says that the Gemara is going to tell us what we're talking about. So, Ibailahu, Haim ibnei tikun olam, mishum duchka desiburahu, odilma mishum delo legavru light v'laisutve. Are we concerned about using up the resources of the community, or are we concerned that people are going to try and capture more people by giving them a greater incentive? So, and what's the nafkamina? What's the difference? Why would it matter? Well, the obvious case that would matter is what happens if one individual wants to spend the extra money and wants to give the extra money. Will we allow him to do so? After all, he's not wasting the community's resources, he's using his own. So, or do we say, no, we're concerned that it's going to cause problems for the future? And it seems like we paskin the latter, meaning that in general, we should prevent, we're trying to prevent and discourage future terrorist activity. So that this is part of the idea of we don't negotiate with terrorists. Okay, I know exactly. It's not good. So Tashma, come in here. De Levi bar Darga Parka Labarte de Betlesar Alfe Dinare Zahav. Well, 1 second. Levi, the son of Darga, he ransomed his daughter for 13,000 golden dinars. Doesn't that show that what matters is the communal funds and not that we don't overpay? So Amar Abaye, Uman Leimalan Divritzon Chachamim Avad. How do you know that he acted appropriately? Dilma Shalob Ritzon Chachamim Avad. Maybe the rabbis wouldn't have been happy, so we don't have a proof. Okay, so we don't have a proof, but again, it seems like we paskin that we worry about the the effect of future terrorist activity. We don't again free captives in order because we want to make sure that we don't that we help society. No, we're concerned about the captives. So what is the difference between these two situations? And in saying that difference, we'll understand what we're talking about. Well, when there's only one captive, well, that's the situation where there's a difference, because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that our concern is about the captives who are left. So if you help escape the only captive, you're fine. But if you don't, well then, but if there are other captives, then we're concerned. And Rashi explains, Deleka Elachad, a Shavui, that if we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 11 lines up, Deleka Elachad in the narrow lines of Rashi, Deleka Elachad Shavui, that there's only one captive. Tanakama, the Tanakama, Chayish Latikon Ha'olam, Kulo, he's worried about the entire world. Shema Yikatzfu al Hashvuyim Ha'atidim Lavo, V'yitnum B'shal Shalaos Ubecharitzin. That what will happen if we help this guy escape? What are the criminals going to do the next time they capture somebody? They're gonna put him in chains. They're gonna put him in some kind of ditch, and they're going to mistreat him even worse than they're mistreating him now. And so as a result, that's why we need to be concerned. Okay.
Don't go there.
Exactly. But Rabbi Shimon would say in that situation, lo chayish, we're not worried about the single, about future captives. Ella imkain yesh shvuyim acherim. We're only concerned about them when there are other captives who are left behind, imo, that are with him. Because in that situation, shema yikatzvu hashavayin liyasran b'yisurin. Maybe they're going to punish the ones that are left. So as a result, this really a difficult situation, but this is what basically you're allowed to escape to protect yourself, but we don't encourage helping people escape because we're worried about the mistreatment that will happen to the people left behind. So those are the two concerns, and we see both of them, the possibility of both of them. But the bottom line seems to be that we paskin like the Tanakama, that we're worried about all future captives, and so as a result, we should not encourage, we should not facilitate escapes of certain captives because we're worried about the treatment of those who left behind and the future captives as well. All right, so now we have a story, and this is going to get us to the talking birds, so pay attention. So B'nasei Rav Nachman B'chashan Kidra B'daihu. The daughters of Rav Nachman were able to stir a boiling pot with their hands, meaning even though the water was boiling hot, they could mix it with their hands. Kasha Leila Rav Elish. Rav Elish was so confused. How was it possible that they did this? Because Ksiv Adam Echad Me'elef Matzati. I've one righteous person I found in 1,000. V'isha B'chol Eila Lo Matzasi. But I haven't found a woman who, that is so righteous. And this is a pasuk in Kohelet. So Ha'ika Benate de Rav Nachman. So these daughters of Rav Nachman. So they maybe, are they very righteous? What's the story with them? So Garmalahu Milsa Ishtabyan. So it turned out that they were all captives. V'ishtaboy ihu nami be'adayu. And Rav Elish was also captive. Yom Echad, one day, Hava Yosef Gabei Hahu Gavra Dahava Yada Belishna Ditzipori. There was a man sitting next to Rav Elish who understood the language of birds. This person was probably not Jewish. Asa Urva Vaka Karile. A raven came and called out to Rav Elish. Amarle, Rav Elish said to him, My Kamar, what's this? What is the bird saying? Amarle, Elish Brach, Elish Brach. Elish, you should run away. Elish, you should run away. Amar Urva Shekrahu. This raven is a liar. Velosa Michna alay. I'm not going to trust it. Adahachi asa Yona b'kakarya. Now, then afterwards, a dove came, and a dove called out to him, to Rav Elish. Amarle, Rav Elish said, My kamra, what's it saying? Amarle, Elish brach. Again, Elish run away, Elish run away. So Amar Knesses Yisrael Kiyona Matila, that the Israel is compared to a dove. Shma mina mitrache shlinisa. Clearly, a miracle is going to happen for me. So he ran away. So he gets ready to run away. Amar Ezel Echse Benase de Rav Nachman. I'm going to go check out the daughters of Rav Nachman. After all, they seem to be extraordinarily righteous. Maybe they should. I should make Kaiman Behemenasaihu. Have they been faithful? Ahadrinu, and then I'll take them with me. Amar. So, but then he said, Nishay kol mile de islahu. Sadran lahadadi beves kekise. Where do women have conversations that I want to overhear what's going on? By the bathroom. So Shamina Kamran, he went there and he heard what they were saying. Ade Govrin Vinahadar Govrin. We have these captors are going to be our husbands now, and we had husbands in Nahardai. Lemalahu Shabayuhu. Let's tell our captors Dilrachkinu Mehacha that they should take us away from here. Delo Lesuinshin, and then our husbands won't come. Okay. Firkin, and they'll hear about where we are, and then they'll come to free us. After all, these husbands are just as good for us. So obviously that's not a good thing that he heard. So come Arak. So as a result, Rav Nachman ran away and he didn't take anybody with him. Asa Ihu Vahahu Gavra. The other man who ran away and understood the languages of birds also ran away. L'didei Israchesh Le'nisa. Well, a miracle happened for Rav Ilish of Arbamarvra. So he crossed on a ferry to the other side. Vahu Gavra Ashkahu Vikatlu. But they found the other person, the bird translator, and they killed him. Ki Hadran Va'asan, when eventually Rav Nachman's daughters came back, Amar Havu Kabachashan Kidra Bekashafim. How did they stir the pot? It wasn't because they were righteous, it was through some sort of magic that they were using. Okay, so key element of this story that is worth noting is that this story is cited by Rav Chaim Shmulevitz in connection with this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, we read Chukas and Balak. In Parshas Balak, God speaks to the Navi Balak, he's a non-Jewish Navi, and every time he speaks to him, Balak tries to read into what God says in the way that is most beneficial to Balak. So Balak works to try and get to be able to be sent to curse the Jewish people. And so the bottom line is that what happens here teaches us an important lesson, because what was Rav Ilish told the first time? He was told to run away, but he didn't believe it. Why didn't he believe it? Because it was beneficial to him. It was something that if he listened to, he would be the beneficiary of it. And as a result, he questioned it. And it was only when he was able to confirm it that he was able to believe it. And the idea is as follows, that sometimes we as individuals have to recognize that when we hear something that we like, we are much more likely to believe it than if we hear something that we don't like. And so as a result, this story is telling us, and it's in connection with this week's Parsha of Parshas Balak, that we have to be very careful if we hear something that we particularly like. And that goes not only for just news generally, but if we hear an interpretation of a mitzvah that somehow makes us better off and makes somebody else worse off, we need to question that very significantly and recognize that maybe it is our own biases that are driving us. And if we do that, then we can really be careful about our observance and follow the lesson that Rav Ilish is teaching for us here, that we have to be extraordinarily careful when we hear something that is good for us. Is it really good for us, or are we just hearing it in the way that we think it's good for us? Okay, one more Mishnah that talks about benefits for society. Ve'ein loken sfarim tefillin umezuzos, that you're allowed to buy a Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos from a non-Jew. Oh, I'm sorry. Ein loken sfarim tefillin umezuzos mina ovdei kochavim yoter al kadei demehen. You're not allowed to pay more than what they're worth. So if a non-Jew steals somebody's tefillin, don't buy it from that non-Jew for more than the tefillin's worth. Yes, maybe he'll mistreat it, but you shouldn't buy it for more than it's worth. Okay. Again, as we turn to Mem Hey Amabet, Mimnei Tikkun Ha'olam, for the benefit of society. That's the reason that we don't want this to happen. So, okay, so Amar Lei, so now the Gemara Okay, so Amar, I'm sorry, I did not scroll here. Okay, so Amar lay. So the Gemara begins by clarifying the nature of this society's benefit from not overpaying. Amar lay Rabuja le Rav Ashi Yasser al Kedei Demeyen Hu De'ain Lokin. You can't pay more than the value. What's the implication? Habakadei Demeyen Lokin. You're allowed to pay their actual value.
It is.
Well, it depends. A Torah is worth, $20,000. A pair of tefillin is worth a few $100s. A mezuzah is worth about $40. So it
40 is
depends.
less.
Yeah, 40 is less. Okay. So Shema Mina Sefer Torah Shenimtza Biyad Ovdei Kochavim Koren Bo. Doesn't that show that since you're allowed to pay its value, it must be that it's a kosher Torah, that you don't have to worry that maybe it's not a kosher Torah. So no, you don't. That's not a necessarily implication. Dilma lignos. Maybe we
These are
need
the
to.
the Torah.
What you could, well, maybe we need to, maybe this is a Torah that needs to be put in Geniza because we're not sure whether it's a valid Torah or not. Amar of Nachman Naktinan, we have a tradition. Sefer Torah Shekasav Min.
Because they have it downstairs, the Torah.
I know, but if somebody were to steal the Torah, would we be allowed to buy it back from them? That's what the Gemara is talking about. Okay, so we have a tradition that if a Sefer Torah is written by a min, Rashi says, is just aduk ba'avodas kachavim, somebody who is dedicated to idol worship, kagon komer, like some kind of priest for that idol worship. Yisaref, that kind of Sefer Torah needs to be burned. Okay, and Rashi explains Yisaref devade l'shem avodas kochavim nekasu, because they definitely wrote it not for Judaism but for their idol worship. So kasvo ovid kochavim, but a regular idolater yiganez, then a regular idolater, you can put it away in Geniza. You don't have to burn it. Okay. Nimtza v'yad min, if it's just found in the hands of a min, so then you ganez, then you only have to put it away. Nimtza biyad ovid kochavim, amrei le yiganez, but amrei le koren bo. If it was found in the hands of a non-Jew and he didn't write it, well then we can. Some say that it needs to be put away, and some say no, you can even read from it. And why? This amrei le koren bo. Svekahu, and Rashi says, this is Rashi 3, 6, 9, 9 lines down for Amrile Korimbo, Svekahu, because this is a double uncertainty. Shema Yisrael Kasvu, maybe a Jew wrote it and it's really kosher. V'im Tim Salomar, who Kasvu, and if you say that the non-Jew himself wrote it, Shema Limkor Yisrael, maybe he wrote it for a Jew, Kasvu. Below the shame of avodas kochavim, and not for some kind of idol worship. This is a remarkable statement because according to this view, which is not what we paskin, a non-Jew would be allowed to write I don't think it's what we paskin. A non-Jew would be allowed to write a Sefer Torah. Okay, so Sefer Torah shekasva over kochavim tanichada yisaref v'tanya idach yiganes. That we have another brisa that deals with it, where one brisa says that we actually have three brises. If it's written by a Torah scroll written by somebody who's not Jewish, one says that it needs to be burned, and one says that it should be put away, B'tanya idach korimbo, and one says that it can be read, meaning that we have three different views, and all three views are said with respect to a Torah written by a non-Jew. So let's take a look and see what the story is. So, the one who says that it should be put away. Hi Tana, the Tani Rebam Nuna Berei, the Rebam is Farshunya. That, I'm sorry, Lokasha. I skipped a bit. Lokasha, Hadatanya Yisaref, the one who says that it needs to be burned. Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer. To Amr Stam Machasheves Ovid Kochavim Lavodas Kochavim. Because a non-Jew's ordinary course is to write something for idolatry, not for Judaism. And the one who says that it should be put away, Hi Tana, that's the following. The Tani Rav Hamnuna Braid the Rav of Mipashrunya, Sefer Torah Tefillin Umezuzas, Shekasvan, Min, Umasar, Ovid Kochavim, Be'eved, Isha, V'katan, Vikuti, actually, the min is probably taken out, but Vikuti, Yisrael, Mumar, Stulin, all of these, if it's written by any of these people, including a non-Jew, it's puzzle. Shenemar, ukshartem, uksavtem. We have in the Parsha of Shema, we say that you have to ukshartem la'osayadecha, that you should tie them to your arm. And it says, uksavtem almuzot beisecha. So why are those two verses juxtaposed? They're juxtaposed is to tell us kosher yeshno b'ksira, yeshno b'ksiva. Anybody who's supposed to be putting the tefillin on their arm, that's who's supposed to be doing the writing. The kosher ain't b'ksira, and anybody who's not supposed to be putting tefillin on, ain't b'ksiva, is not supposed to be writing Torah, tefillin, and mezuzah. The Hadatanya Korinbo. Now, what about the opinion that says that you can read it? Aitanahu detanya lokin svarmin of de kochavim b'chol makom. You're allowed to buy Torah scrolls from non-Jews anywhere. Ubilbachi yuksuvin kilchasan, as long as they were written properly. Umase ba'ovid kochavim echad b'tzidon. There was a guy, a non-Jew in Sidon. Shahaya kotiv svarim. He would write Torah scrolls. V'hitu Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel likach mimenu. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said you could buy from him. The Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel ibor lishman buy. Well, 1 second. Doesn't Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel require that they be written for the special purpose, meaning that you have to have the right intention when you are making the cases for tefillin? So ksiva lishman lo boy, if you have to make the case for the tefillin with the right intention, well, then of course you have to write the Torah with the right intention. And a non-Jew is assumed not to be able to have the proper intention. So how is this possible? Titania, sipan zahav, if you coat the tefillin with a layer of gold, o shetala alehen or behema tameya, or if you make a casing out of the hide of an unkosher animal, psulot, then the tefillin are not kosher. The or behema tahora, if you use the proper animal, ksherot, then they're kosher. The aval pisha lo ibdan lishman, even though you didn't do the tanning for the purpose of making the tefillin. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer afilu or behema tahora psulot ad sheyavdain lishman. You have to do the tanning for the right purpose. So as a result, clearly the Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel requires the proper intention with respect to tefillin, the tefillin boxes themselves. So of course he must hold with respect to the writing. So Amar Rabbi Bar Shmuel explains, Beger shechazar l'suro. When Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel allowed the buying of this Torah scrolls from this idolater, it's talking about an idolater who had converted to Judaism, but then went back to his idolatrous ways. L'suro, well, 1 second, he went back to his original ways. Kol shekain, dahavi le min. That's the definition of somebody who's a min, somebody who abandoned Judaism. So Amar Rav Ashi, shechozer l'sura mishum yira. No, we're talking about somebody who converted to Judaism and then was afraid of how he was going to be treated by other non-Jews. And as a result, he reverted back to his idolatrous ways. So that person who is, if he writes a Sefer Torah, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that Sefer Torah is okay. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, Malin b'demeyan ad kedei trapik. That we are actually allowed, there's a brisa that says that we are allowed to pay a little bit, a trapaic, which is a certain value above the value of the svarim. So although our Mishnah said you can't pay more than they're worth, you're allowed to pay a little bit more. So my trapaic, the Gemara asks, that's what we're about to say. How much is a trapaic? Amar of Sheshis, istera. It's an istera. So what is an istera? Rashi tells us that an istera is sela medina. It is the coin that was used out in the provinces. And what is that? Sheminis shebesela tsuri. And it was 1/8 of a sela tsuri. So that was basically a bit, right? We have 2 bits is a quarter. I don't know, you're right. If you know, remember that. 2 bits is a quarter. 1 bit is half a quarter. So this is a half a quarter. Dahainu chatzi dinar, which is equal to half of a dinar. V'halchim mefarish b'ksubos.
Does it have a quarter?
I know. Halchim b'ksubos parak.
Yeah, but not
Correct. You're right. There's no such thing, but it's basically 12.5 cents of the money
You
that
can't
they
get
put in.
above that.
No, you can't. There's no coin.
13,
this
you can
country.
make it 13.
You can make it 13
and
cents.
12.
Exactly. All right. So you're allowed to pay 13
And
cents
that's it.
extra, but not anything more. All right. So Hu Tayata, there was an Arab woman. Now we're going to have a quick story, and then we'll be done for today. A quick story that says, why is it that we don't want to undervalue and say that something that is really holy is worth too little? It's because listen to this story. There was this Arab woman. She brought some tefillin to Abaye, and Abaye figured, listen, I don't want to give her the amount that they're worth. I'll pretend that they're worth very little. So Amar Allah, Yavatle, Reish, Vitamre. Listen, give me each pair of tefillin that you have for a few dates. That's all they're worth. They're not worth very much. So Imalia Zihara, she got upset. Shakla Shadatinu Benara, and she threw them all in the river. Amar. So Abaye said, Loi Baili Lizalzulinu Ba'apa Kulehai. I have to be careful. He actually teaches him a lesson that he needs to be careful not to undervalue it. Because sometimes if you negotiate too hard, the person goes to the other extreme and says, I'll just throw it away. I'm not going to sell it to you for a pennies. I'm going to just put it in the trash. And we don't want tefillin to be thrown into the trash. All right. That completes our various aside
What
on
happens to
all
them?
these other
What
topics.
happened to it?
They got ruined. They got ruined. That's why Abaye was upset about the way he acted. So now we are finally going to get back. What is our Masechet called? Our Masechet is called Gittin. What are we supposed to be talking about? Divorce. How did we get here? We had an aside about divorce in connection with a rule that said that we wanted that for the protection of society, we would have certain rules in connection with Gittin. We then talked about other rules that protect society. And now, God willing, we're going to get back to the topic of divorce. But for that, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to the Kulam. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.